Welcome to Whispers of the Web, where the hidden gems of the web come to life. Join us as we unravel the most fascinating tales, secrets, and discussions from across the web. Every whisper has a story. If you enjoy our journey through the whispers of the web, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the intrigue. Story number 1. You want me to get the attention of your husband's commanding officer? It's your funeral. So over the past few days, I've become friends with a retired Army officer that I'll call Belle. She's been delighting me with stories of her service, and she shared this wonderful story that I think you all will enjoy. Names and some details have been changed to protect the innocent. Belle was a young second lieutenant at her first posting. As she put it, "My college diploma hadn't even arrived in the mail, and I was scared as hell. Fortunately, she got on the non-commissioned officer's good side and settled in pretty nicely. One afternoon, she was at work when in storms an officer's wife looking like she was in the mood to cause hell. Belle keeps her head down, trying to stay busy when she hears the dreaded words. 'I'm talking to you, soldier.' Belle looked up and saw the woman, let's call her Karen because why not, standing in front of her. 'Can I help you, ma'am?' Belle asked. 'Yeah, I'm Major I'm So Important's wife and I need to speak to Colonel Stone.' 'Do you have an appointment?' 'He's busy.' Belle asked. 'Just go get him. I'll stand right here until you do.' Belle looks around, wondering what the hell she's supposed to do. She didn't want to risk her job because Colonel Stone was known around the base for having a fierce temper. 'I'll have you knocked back down to private if you don't do as I say,' Karen shouts. 'Now move!' Wanting to get away, Belle got up and walked towards the colonel's office, intending to get away for a long enough coffee break that Karen will forget. When she looked back, she sees Karen is watching her like a hawk. So there goes that plan. Colonel Stone's door is closed and Belle knocks on the door. 'Yes?' Colonel Stone barked. 'Sir, it's Second Lieutenant Belle Smith,' she said. 'Come in.' Belle opens the door, does the customary salute, and he immediately notices how nervous she is. 'What is it?' 'Major I'm So Important's wife is here and she wants to speak to you,' Belle said, her voice squeaking. 'Does she have an appointment?' 'She just said to go get you and she wouldn't leave until you saw her.' 'I see. Did she threaten to knock you down to private?' 'She did.' Colonel Stone nodded and then said in a voice that scared Belle, 'Send her in.' Belle salutes and then goes back to Karen. Karen looks absolutely smug. 'He'll see you now,' Belle said. 'See? Now that wasn't so hard, was it?' Karen said, strolling over to the colonel's office. It's at this point that a first sergeant named Sanders comes in. He just sits down, and as the office door closes, he counts down in a low voice. 3, 2, 1. "What the hell were you thinking?" Colonel Stone shouted. For a good 5 minutes, he proceeded to tear Karen a new butthole, telling her that she isn't permitted to wear her husband's rank and that if she tries pulling anything like that ever again, her husband will be busted down to private faster than he could sneeze. Karen left the office like a bat out of hell, white as a sheet and quaking. Belle never saw her again, but she and the major got divorced shortly afterwards. According to Belle, he realized what a liability she'd be to his career. Whoa, those of you in the service should get a good laugh out of this one. Having a wife who is so entitled that she will use your rank to intimidate those that she views as beneath her is wild. Knowing they eventually separated was definitely the right move for his career, but I also wonder if it's the right move for their happiness. Maybe sitting his wife down and having a serious talk with her could have fixed this. Maybe he already did. Maybe this was the last straw for him. It sure seems like it with this story. Malicious compliance really tickles me, especially because you're just following orders. Belle definitely did the right thing by just doing what she was told. She didn't get in trouble and got a good laugh out of the entire situation. Story number 2. So sue me. Really? This happened several years ago. I was working 40 hours a week programming at my main job, but I did occasional small projects in the evenings and on weekends for other clients. At one point I was referred to a large company that runs major stadiums and event venues around the country. One of their stadiums is relatively close to where I live. I'll just call them Mark 1 for this story. The saga begins. This manager at Mark 1 said they wanted a simple administration database and user interface for employee timekeeping. Apparently the old system they had was not working for them. I got details of what they wanted and drafted a set of specifications. Told them I could write the system to the specs for a $2,000 flat rate. They agreed. I immediately went to work and churned out a database and UI for the system with full documentation in about 2 weeks. So I scheduled an in-person meeting to show them. Now, when I showed up at the meeting, someone representing the security department was there, and he asked about getting some additional features. Sure, I told him, I can do that. So I went back, wrote up a change request, and incorporated the additional features into the platform. I scheduled another meeting with Mark 1 for a couple of days later. When I got to that meeting, I noticed the audience had grown. There were 2 extra people from the finance department. Can you add feature X, feature Y, and feature Z? They asked. Sure, no problem. So I left, wrote up a change request, and added the features. A few days later, I met with them again. Imagine my surprise when the audience size had grown, and the new attendees asked for more features. This went on for about 5 more rounds, and I was getting frustrated that I had spec'd out a 2-week project that was now taking months, and I wouldn't be paid until I delivered, and they accepted the final product. But I chugged along implementing all their change requests. But one day the Mark 1 manager called me. Apparently she had been speaking with other departments that weren't represented in her status meetings of ever-increasing mass. She gave me a list of dozens of new features they wanted, some of which would require a complete redesign of the core database and an overhaul of the UI. I had had enough. I told her, "This is a complete overhaul of the original specifications. I'll have to redesign and rebuild this from the ground up." "Well, that's not my problem," she responded. "Well, actually it is. I'm not going to design and build an entirely new system until you pay me for the current one, built to the specs we agreed on." After a short pause, she dropped a bomb on me. "Well, we're not going to renegotiate. You can consider this project cancelled." "That's not how this works. You still have to pay me for the work I've done." "No, I don't. You haven't delivered anything. Sue me." And she hung up. Cue the malicious compliance. Meet me at the courthouse. I took Mark 1 manager's advice and went to the courthouse the next day to file in small claims court to recover $2,000 from Mark 1. On my court date a couple of months later, I went down to the courthouse and was greeted by an arbitrator. In my state, they have court-appointed arbitrators meet the litigants when they arrive, to see if the parties can sort out the case with an agreement to maximize the judge's time. The arbitrator asked me, "Is there anything you would agree to resolve this immediately?" I thought about it and said, "If they'll pay me 90%, $1,800, right now I'll drop the suit." He then went into a side room where the Mark 1 manager and the corporate lawyer were hanging out. I heard her screaming that they would either pay it all or pay zero. The arbitrator came to me with the news, and I told him, "I heard, and I'm happy to take it all." He laughed and said no, they want to go to trial. Fast forward a couple of hours. Fast forward is a funny phrase, considering how slow the court moved, but hey, and we're standing in front of the judge. I'm at my table alone, and the Mark 1 manager and lawyer are standing at the opposite table. The judge asked Mark 1 manager to tell her side first. She went into a very long speech about the project in corporate America and apple pie and thermonuclear weapons, and honestly I have no idea because I stopped listening about 28 minutes ago. She talked nonstop for at least 30 minutes. Then the judge asked me for my story. Now I wasn't maliciously ignoring Mark 1 manager's long-winded tale of political intrigue and patriotism. I was actually formulating a strategy. I thought to myself the judge probably had people who liked to speechify in front of him all day every day. I also thought he might appreciate a short and sweet story that got straight to the point and didn't waste his time. So I said, "Your Honor, they agreed to pay me $2,000 to design and build a software system for them. I completed the work based on the agreed specs, and then they decided to cancel the project after I was done. That was it." Then the judge asked me, "How do I know you did the work?" I had printed out the specs, change requests, documentation, and source code the night before. I lifted a ream of paper, 500 pages, from my table and offered it to the bailiff. "Here's the code I wrote for them, Your Honor." The bailiff came to take it from me, and the judge waved him off. "No need, I can see it from here." The judge then asked Mark 1 manager, "Is this true?" She looked like she was in a daze. Yes." "Then I fine for the plaintiff in the amount of $2,000. If you pay me." About a month later, Mark 1 still hadn't paid, so I called the county sheriff and explained. Sent him the court judgment documents, and he said, No problem, they'll pay. The sheriff actually called me later that day. He was on a cell phone and I could hear him talking to the Mark I manager. He told her cut a check for $2,000 right now or he was going to rip your computers out of the wall and auction them off until the judgment is satisfied. I don't know if he had that authority, but the sheriff seemed to have a grudge against Mark I, and he was reveling in the opportunity to dog them out. Apparently Mark I believed he had the authority because, long story short, the sheriff had a $2,000 check in his hand about 15 minutes later, and it was in my mailbox about a week later. This one is so good, guys. I love hearing stories about freelance programmers and designers getting the payout they deserve from some corporation that decided they didn't need to pay anymore. For those of you that are programmers, do you have any similar stories? I used to make crafts and had a few bad customers but never anything this big. Love to see it. Story number 3. Take notes of everything you say in the meeting? Okay, but it will get you fired. So this happened a few years ago, and I will be vague since I'm still not sure if the dust has fully settled from this fiasco yet. At my former company, I was the secretary for a small improvement team that would meet monthly to discuss issues within the company and brainstorm ways to fix them. Something you need to know about me is that I was given this role because people know I am meticulous at keeping records due to HR-related issues I had at a previous place of employment. I don't think my boss realized that this careful record-keeping applied to her as well, especially when she appointed me to be secretary of this little committee, but I digress. I was a model employee, Reed Award-winning, and went above and beyond what was asked, as were many others in my department, but we were still having customer complaints and dealt with regular safety issues due to the company at large and through no fault of our own. When we brought these concerns to our boss's attention, emails were left unread, and during in-person exchanges, we were called whiny, needy, and were told that we needed to just deal with it. Whatever the issue, from items being stolen by customers to people being unhappy with the procedures the boss had set down for us to follow, it was always made to somehow be our fault. When we sought support from other departments, we were met with cold indifference, since the boss was great to them, and we must be exaggerating the things she said to us. Well, during an improvement meeting at the end of the fiscal year, it all came to a head. Myself and a couple of my team members dug our heels in and were insistent about the unresolved issues the boss refused to acknowledge, and she finally went off on us. She told us everyone was incompetent, didn't deserve our jobs, and that maybe customers would like us more if we were more likable. When people pressed her on safety issues, she continued to reiterate that we would just have to deal with it, and that if someone was going to die, they already would have, right? I, as the secretary, did my duty and took notes of all that happened over the course of that meeting. I usually did bullet points, but that night, I was feeling a little more thorough, so I wrote down words. Every word that was said, every hateful comment, denial of accountability, and idle threat was recorded in black and white. Now, a second part of my job was to distribute the notes from the improvement meeting to the rest of the company. So, come the next morning, I ran about 100 copies of the transcript of the meeting and hand-delivered them to every single department in the building, and things blew up. People from other departments who had attended the meeting were able to verify that everything I had typed up had really been said, and folks were mad, threatening to quit, refusing to do their normal duties, browsing Indeed during work, etc. My boss's boss, who worked at HU, so I didn't get the opportunity to hand her a copy, got wind of these meeting minutes only a few hours after I had handed them out and had an hour-long, off-the-record conversation with me about all the safety issues I had documented, all the concerns I had submitted to management in writing, and all the records I had regarding my boss's inaction. She was very grateful for the 100 pages of documentation I sent over and thanked me for my time. The day after I unleashed Pandora's box, I put in my 2 weeks' notice, took a new job, and pieced out to greener pastures. At first, it seemed like things were calming down after I left, but the following year, the company did not renew my boss's contract. I still feel a bit bad because I wasn't trying to get her fired or ruin her life. I was just desperate for some accountability thrown her way to create some positive change in the company. But at the end of the day, I just did what she had asked me to do. That's one way to ensure you get the help you need in a company setting. Hopefully that boss will learn a valuable lesson here and be better at a new company. But if I'm being honest, I doubt it. I had a boss once that stormed into my department one day and loudly announced to us, "You're all replaceable, don't think you aren't." I wish I had recorded it, but I quit 3 months later. I will not take that disrespect, especially when nothing had happened. She just came in and was angry. Come to think of it, she was angry a lot. I'm glad I'm not there anymore. Story number 4. You don't want me to work after I put in my 2 weeks, okay? So when I was in my early 20s, I worked at a well-known sandwich franchise. I actually really liked my job and I would open and close. I'd also come in whenever anyone called out because I lived 5 minutes away. One day my boss hires a new person, no big deal. Except my boss kept cutting my hours more and more and giving them to the new person. I went from working 30 plus hours a week to working less than 15. Oh, and I was training them. So after a few months of my hours getting cut but me still coming in whenever called, I put in my 2 weeks. My boss proceeded to not schedule me a single hour after that. Cue malicious compliance. One of my coworkers, who would call in regularly, didn't come in to open the store at 6 a.m. I drove by at 11 and it was still dark. My old boss had called me to ask if I could open for her. Nope, you didn't want to give me any hours after I put in my 2 weeks, figure it out. Well, I drove by that store for a couple weeks and wouldn't you know it was only open half the time. It's so funny to me that a company will give the shaft to one of their good employees, especially one who was essentially an on-call employee for half of their hours. Working in retail and food service, it feels like this is a common occurrence. My first job was as a server and I did that for 3 years. When I decided to quit, I had been promoted to a manager. During my 2-week notice, they refused to schedule me, but other servers would call me to see if I could at least cover for them. Funny thing is that they told me I could come back anytime I wanted to. Why would they think someone would want to come back after being treated that way for dedicating 3 years of your life to a company just to be screwed over when you are respectful and give them the customary 2-week notice? Personally, I will never work in customer service again. Story number 5. Manager told me to call the person of the computer I was working on, so I did. Cross post from tech support. I was sitting in my office one slow day and the CEO walked in, always a pucker moment even though I'm on very good terms with him, and he handed me an obviously non-business laptop and asked if I could get it back up and running as it had a very important thing on it that was needed shortly, and as I wasn't doing anything, and he still signed my paycheck. I said, "You got it, sir." Later a middle mangler comes in and asks me to do something and I say, "You're number 2 in line," and pointed to the obviously not corporate laptop I was fixing. Mangler didn't like that much and demanded I call whoever and tell them that it wasn't acceptable for me to be working on personal equipment. So I pulled out my cell and called. Mangler could only hear my half of the convo, but what he heard was something like, "Hey Tom, I got Bob here telling me it isn't acceptable for me to be working on your personal stuff and he wanted me to call you and tell you." "Oh sure, he's right here, hang on." And I handed the phone to the mangler. Mangler started off saying, "It's not acceptable," and then his eyes got real big and the rest of the conversation was, "Yes sir," and "No sir." He hung up and thundered, "Why didn't you tell me it was COS laptop?" And I said, "You didn't give me a chance and demanded I call them right now." Not only is this great malicious compliance, but it's amazing instant karma. I bet Bob will never do that again. Thank you for joining us for today's journey through the whispers of the web. Share your thoughts and suggestions for our next adventure. If you're not yet a part of our whispering community, click the subscribe button and click the bell for notifications to never miss out on another story. Join us next time as we uncover another enthralling tale from the web. Until our next whisper.